iconic image of a witch being burned at the stake didn't come from the Salem witch trials. So, where did it come from? As you probably know, during the Salem witch trials, more than 200 people were accused of being witches, but 30 women and men were found guilty and killed. 19 were hung, and 1 was killed by pressing, basically being crushed to death by rocks. And at least 5 people died while they were in jail, but none of them were burned at the stake. So, where does this image come from? Well, one of the first records of a witch being burned at the stake took place around the year 1300 in Ireland. And here's where we find our answer. It's in Europe, where we see many witches being burned for witchcraft. That method of death was favored in Europe as it was considered a more painful way to die. The exact number is unknown, but modern scholars conservatively estimate around 40 to 50,000 people were killed for being witches between the 15th and 18th centuries. But if you think witches being burned at the stake is a thing of the past, think again. In 2021, a woman in South Africa was burned as a witch by members in her community. Unfortunately, this has been an ongoing issue in modern-day South Africa. Now, here's something you might not know. In some cases of burning at the stake, mechanisms were put in place to shorten the victim's suffering. Things like attaching a container of gunpowder to the victim, which would explode when heated by the fire, killing the victim instantly. Or placing the victim in a noose made of chain, so that the death ultimately occurred by hanging. Okay, so why were witches burned in the first place? Well, initially it was the church with secular support that tried to first stamp out heresy. And then the church moved on to punishing magic, turning it into a sort of imaginary heresy. Some scholars believe that the Inquisition needed a sort of other world ruled by the devil, even if it didn't correspond to anything in reality. But in the 16th and 17th centuries, the political authorities took over from the church in tracking down witches. They decided that the practice of any kind of magic, black or white, was based on a pact with the devil. But it's important to note that witchcraft was actually a normal part of everyday life. Witches were often called for along with religious ministers to help the ill or to deliver a baby. Most accusations of witchcraft did not originate in the church, but resulted from personal rivalries and disputes in small towns and villages. Evidence points to several factors that may have contributed to the mass hysteria we saw in the Salem witch trials. There was an influx of refugees from King William's war with the French colonists. There was a recent smallpox epidemic, which of course goes badly, and of course the ever-present threat of attack from Native Americans. There were growing rivalries with the neighboring seaport of Salem town, and there were building tensions between the leading families in the community. Combined, these created the perfect storm of suspicion and resentment. Many historians believe these witches were also victims of scapegoating, personal vendettas, and social mores against outspoken, strong women. During the witch trials, the court accepted spectral evidence. Now, what is spectral evidence? Spectral evidence is evidence based upon dreams and visions of the spiritual realm. In fact, most of the evidence against the accused in the Salem witch trials was spectral evidence. Now that is spooky.